Imagine a small flame flickering in the darkness. It doesn't look like much at first, just a delicate glow, barely resisting the surrounding night. Yet its warmth and light are undeniable. Draw closer and you can feel its gentle heat on your skin. Watch carefully, and you'll see the way it dances and sways, defying the gloom. That flame is fragile, yes, easily extinguished by a gust of wind or a moment of carelessness. But while it burns, it can spread light far beyond its size, guiding those who wander in the dark. In many ways, liberty is like that flame, precious, precarious, and capable of illuminating the world if we protect it. For most of human history, that flame was little more than a dim spark in a vast wilderness of authority. Kings and emperors, warlords and high priests, throughout the ages they ruled with heavy hands, and ordinary people lived at their mercy. The idea that an individual might chart their own course was often unthinkable. Those in power tended the darkness carefully, wary of any sign of light that might loosen their grip. Yet time and again, against the odds, the spark of liberty appeared. In an ancient city-state by the sea, citizens once gathered to debate and vote, defying the notion that only monarchs should decide. Centuries later, a band of barons confronted a king on a meadow, demanding he honor certain freedoms. These moments were brief and fragile, but they left echoes. Something in the human spirit has always yearned to breathe free, to claim a small zone of light in which to live without fear. Much later, in more enlightened ages, those faint glimmers of freedom began to grow into a steadier flame. Philosophers started to insist that liberty was not a gift from kings, but a birthright of every individual. Their words sparked courage in the hearts of ordinary people. Colonists on a distant shore declared that all men are created equal, and that governments derive their just powers only from the consent of the governed. In the streets of old empires, citizens tore down bastions of privilege, crying out that liberty, equality, and fraternity should guide the new order. Constitutions were written, carefully crafting checks on authority and spelling out rights that no ruler was meant to violate. Slowly, unevenly, liberty took root. Where it did, the results were startling. Freed from constant fear of censors and tyrants, people began to speak, invent, and trade with a vigor never seen before. Farms yielded to factories, candles gave way to electric light, and the world grew richer and more connected. Where hunger and plague had long been accepted as fate, now better farming and medicine saw far fewer go hungry and deadly diseases retreat. Average people began to live longer and more comfortably than ever before. Ideas that once took decades to spread could travel in weeks as societies became more open and connected. The creative energies unleashed by liberty produced technological marvels. Railways spanned continents, factories mass-produced affordable goods, and electricity illuminated cities at night. Life's texture was changing rapidly, mostly for the better, as freedom gave innovation the green light. It was as if that small flame, now burning brighter in the open air, revealed countless new possibilities hidden in the darkness. The arts blossomed, sciences leapt forward, and for the first time, large numbers of people, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, thinkers, could live their lives according to their own designs, pursuing happiness in their own ways. Yet the story of liberty has never been one of simple triumph. The flame that burns bright can also cast shadows, and the modern age brought new perils for freedom. Even as constitutions and parliaments spread, so too did movements that sought to snuff out liberty in the name of grand visions. In the last century, whole nations surrendered to totalitarian ideologies promising security, equality, or glory. People cheered leaders who vowed to remake society from top to bottom, only to find themselves in chains. The world saw firsthand how the collective chant of a crowd could drown out the quiet voice of individual conscience. Under crimson banners and twisted crosses alike, dictators rose and built regimes where nearly every human action, from one's occupation to one's opinion, fell under state control. Barbed wire borders and secret police became grim symbols of societies where the flame of freedom was reduced to a memory. Millions lived in fear, their lives scripted by someone else's plan. The cost in human creativity and dignity was incalculable. Even in societies that proudly call themselves free, liberty can be lost by degrees. Often it is not taken at sword point or under the boot of a tyrant, but handed over in moments of fear or even compassion. Faced with threats, wars, terrorist attacks, economic collapse, or a sudden epidemic, people understandably yearn for safety. In anxious times, voices whisper that freedom is a luxury we can't afford right now, that we must trade a bit of it away for security. So laws multiply, surveillance expands, emergency powers stretch on long after emergencies pass. Each step is defended as minor and necessary, and indeed each one may be taken alone. But collectively, they accumulate into a maze of regulations and edicts constricting the individual. The cage often builds slowly, gilded with good intentions, until one day we wake up to find that the space in which we exercise our free will has shrunk considerably. History provides ample evidence of this trade-off. In wartime, even liberal democracies have accepted drastic limits on freedom. During the great wars of the 20th century, governments imposed rationing of food and fuel, blackout curfews at night, press censorship, and conscription of young men into the army. People tolerated these measures because they believed survival itself was on the line, and indeed, extraordinary times may call for temporary sacrifices. But the trouble is, when the guns fall silent, the expanded powers of the state don't always shrink back to their pre-war size. Taxes introduced to fund the war effort often linger and grow in peace. Agencies created to manage the crisis look for new purposes to justify their existence. Citizens, weary from conflict, may not immediately notice that some emergency rules never quite went away. Over time, a new normal sets in, with government retaining some of the authority it grabbed in the crisis. We have seen this pattern again and again. It's a cautionary tale. Even for good reasons, giving up liberty is easier than getting it back. The lesson for us is to enter any crisis with eyes open. When we grant special powers to our leaders, we must demand that they be limited in scope and time, and that when the storm passes, our freedoms return in full. Otherwise, we risk the slow transformation of emergency measures into a permanent road to serfdom, to borrow the warning phrase of one economist. This slow erosion doesn't only happen in emergencies. In the course of ordinary politics, there is always someone eager to protect us from ourselves. If people indulge in unhealthy foods or habits, there are calls to regulate or ban them for the collective good. If some fall behind in the race of life, there are voices urging that the state must pick winners and losers to ensure a kind of forced fairness. Bit by bit, rules pile up, many well-meaning, to be sure, telling us how to work, what to buy, how to speak, even how to raise our children. Before long, citizens find that what was once personal choice is now subject to approval or oversight. A subtle paternalism creeps in, society treating adults like perpetual adolescents who cannot be trusted with freedom. The cage doesn't always come as iron bars. Sometimes it comes as a cushioned enclosure, promising to take care of all our needs if only we concede our autonomy. One has to wonder, at what point does a helping hand become a controlling grip? What, then, do we really mean by liberty? It's a word that stirs passion, but it's often misunderstood. In simplest terms, liberty means living under your own direction, not under the compulsion of someone else. It is the absence of coercion, freedom from the threat of force or punishment for making your own choices. When you have liberty, you can decide where to work, what to believe, whom to befriend, and how to live, so long as you do not infringe on another person's right to do the same. It does not guarantee that life will be easy or that you will achieve all your desires. Far from it. What it guarantees is that the obstacles you face are not deliberately placed by the hand of authoritarian power. The world will still challenge you with misfortune or competition, but in a free society, you have room to try, to fail, and to try again. Liberty gives you ownership of your own destiny, both the triumphs and the mistakes. Liberty, importantly, is not the absence of all restraint. Some rules are not only compatible with freedom, but essential to it. Think of a game. Without rules, the game collapses into chaos or cheating. In society, the equivalent is the rule of law, a common framework that applies to everyone and keeps our interactions fair and predictable. Under the rule of law, I know that if I earn $1, it's mine to spend or save. No thief or official has the right to seize it arbitrarily. I know that if I open a shop or write a controversial opinion, I won't be shut down or jailed just because someone powerful dislikes it. Laws in a free society are generally simple and principled. Don't steal, don't assault, keep your contracts, respect the rights of others. These aren't oppressions, they are protections, a kind of mutual agreement that we won't treat each other as prey. Such laws actually expand liberty by making it safe to trust others and venture beyond our own brute strength. When you drive on the highway, you give up the freedom to swerve wildly across lanes, but in return, you gain the far greater freedom of being able to travel long distances safely alongside thousands of other people. Good laws work the same way. They place some limits on behavior, especially any initiation of force or fraud, so that within those broad bounds, all of us can go about our lives secure that our basic rights won't be violated. Crucially, these laws must apply to everyone, rulers and citizens alike. If a law doesn't bind the powerful as well as the powerless, it isn't truly law but just another form of privilege. Under genuine rule of law, even the government faces limits. Officials can't simply bend rules on a whim. This principle is our bulwark against tyranny. It ensures that liberty is not at the mercy of someone's mood or agenda, but anchored in agreed-upon justice. Laws, of course, are only part of the story. A free society also relies on a certain character in its citizens, a moral and cultural fabric that binds people to do right by each other, even when no authority is watching. Liberty thrives best among individuals who practice virtues like honesty, self-restraint, tolerance, and compassion. Think about it. No law can force neighbors to be kind or fair. Those qualities must come from within. If people routinely lie, cheat, or exploit one another, the trust that freedom requires erodes and cries will soon arise for someone to clamp down and impose order. Thus, personal responsibility and ethics are the invisible regulators of a free community. Parents, schools, religious and civic groups, these all play a role in cultivating the integrity and empathy that allow a populace to govern itself. When enough people do the right thing out of conscience rather than fear of punishment, you need fewer policemen and fewer intrusive rules. In that way, virtue is the soul of liberty. It keeps freedom from decaying into license and chaos. One early American founder noted that their new constitution was built for a society guided by morality and would falter if citizens lost their virtue. Whether one agrees with his specific wording or not, the underlying truth remains. For a free society to endure, it helps greatly if individuals are prepared to be their own watchdogs, guided by principles of decency and mutual respect. With liberty comes responsibility, an often repeated phrase that is nonetheless true. To be free to choose also means to bear the consequences of those choices. This can be daunting. It's much easier, after all, to let someone else call the shots and take the blame when things go wrong. But a society of free people requires that each of us accepts ownership of our actions. In fact, this sense of responsibility is the very thing that makes freedom meaningful. If all outcomes were guaranteed regardless of what we do, our choices would hardly matter. Risk and reward go hand in hand with liberty. The prospect of failure is the price of opportunity. I remember the first time I truly tasted that mix of freedom and accountability. It was when I moved out of my parents' home to attend college in a faraway city. Suddenly, every decision was mine. What to eat, when or whether to study, how to spend my money, when to come home at night. There was a giddy sense of liberation in realizing I could do as I pleased. I could stay up until dawn or skip classes without so much as a raised eyebrow from anyone. But soon enough, reality asserted itself. If I overslept and missed an exam, I alone bore the consequences. If I spent my rent money on something frivolous, it was I who would face an empty pantry or an angry landlord. Those first months on my own were a whirlwind of small mistakes and discoveries. I burned dinners because no one had ever forced me to learn to cook. I paid a couple of bills late and learned about late fees the hard way. Yet, I also felt a growing sense of confidence with each problem solved and each lesson learned. The freedom to make mistakes turned out to be a great teacher. By the end of that year, I noticed I walked a bit taller, proud that I could run my own life, warts and all. That is the quiet reward of responsibility. It shapes us into wiser, more capable individuals. Some might ask, if everyone simply goes their own way, how does society not descend into chaos? How can a collection of self-directed individuals result in anything but a mess of conflicting actions? The intriguing answer is that a spontaneous order often arises from the freedom of many people simultaneously pursuing their interests. Think of a bustling marketplace at noon on a given day. Hundreds of people mill about, shoppers hunting for tonight's dinner ingredients or a new pair of shoes, merchants calling out deals, carts of produce arriving from farms at the crack of dawn, perhaps a street performer entertaining a small crowd by the fountain. It looks chaotic at first glance, yet if you watch longer, you see patterns. Shoppers find what they need, merchants adjust their prices based on demand, and new shipments appear just in time when supplies run low. By evening, most of the goods find their way into someone's hands, and people go home satisfied. No single authority directed all these interactions. No king or committee told the farmers how many tomatoes to send or the shoe seller how many sandals to stock. Instead, countless individuals made their own plans, guided by prices, habits, and hunches, and somehow it all fit together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. This is the magic of a free society, order without central orders. I've even observed a kind of spontaneous order on the road. Once, while traveling abroad, I was caught in a busy intersection when the traffic lights suddenly died. Cars, buses, and motorcycles from all four directions converged at the crossing, drivers honking and inching forward. For a minute, it seemed chaos was inevitable. But then a fascinating thing happened. A few drivers slowed and signaled for others to go ahead. Some rolled down windows to make hand gestures or exchange a quick word. One man in a reflective vest, perhaps an off-duty traffic officer or just a brave citizen, stepped into the center and started motioning when each lane should take its turn. In a few moments, this snarled knot of traffic began to untangle. Vehicles passed through one after another, not perfectly, but without crashes or shouting matches. Everyone got a turn. It struck me that these strangers managed to coordinate themselves simply because it was in their shared interest to avoid gridlock. They didn't need an official command. They improvised a solution on the spot. It was a small reminder that order can emerge almost organically, even in the absence of formal control. One of the classic examples of spontaneous coordination is something as ordinary as the supply of bread in a city. Each morning, bakeries are stocked with fresh loaves, enough to feed millions of residents. We take that for granted, but if you stop to think, who organizes this marvel? Not a government ministry. It happens through the decentralized decisions of farmers, millers, truck drivers, and bakers, all responding to the signals of supply and demand. Months earlier, a wheat farmer decided how much to plant, based on the going price of grain and perhaps a hunch about the weather. Millers purchased wheat and ground it into flour. Truckers offered their services to transport that flour to bakeries. Bakers rose before dawn to mix dough and heat their ovens, guessing how many customers would come in. Each of these people made independent choices, yet by dawn, nearly every neighborhood has bread available. If a bakery underestimates demand and sells out too early, they will bake more tomorrow, or a competitor will step in to fill the gap. If they bake too much and bread goes stale, they'll adjust by baking less or lowering the price. It is an ever-adjusting dance, coordinated by no one in particular, and yet by the collective wisdom of all involved. This emergent order is remarkably resilient. Even if one farm has a bad harvest or one bakery closes, others pick up the slack, guided by the incentives and information embedded in market prices. Like birds flocking in flight, changing direction almost in unison without a leader, an economy based on free exchange finds its own equilibrium. If you pause to consider, no single person knows how to make something as simple as a pencil entirely by themselves. The wood may come from cedar trees in one country, the graphite from mines in another, the rubber for the eraser from a distant plantation. Thousands of individuals contribute: loggers, miners, factory workers, ship captains carrying materials across oceans, yet none of them alone set out to make a pencil for me or you. Each is pursuing their own interest, selling their labor or goods for a wage or profit, and in doing so, they add one piece to a puzzle that results in pencils aplenty for anyone who wants one. It's as if an invisible hand guides all these separate efforts toward an outcome that no single person planned. This isn't magic or altruism, it's the emergent order of free exchange. This brings us to a crucial insight. As messy as freedom can appear, it often outperforms enforced order. Whenever governments or authorities have tried to micromanage these complex systems, they quickly run into a wall of ignorance. No group of officials, however well-intentioned or educated, can know all the changing preferences, local conditions, and creative ideas of millions of people. In the absence of the price signals and feedback that free markets provide, decision-makers are left guessing. History provides sobering examples. In economies where central planners dictated production, store shelves often stood empty of things people desperately wanted, even as warehouses stockpiled unsold goods nobody needed. The planners might set a quota for shoes, for instance, and factories would churn out millions of identical pairs, only to find that they made far too many left-footed shoes or sizes nobody could wear. Meanwhile, other stores might have no soap or sugar that week. Such scenes are a far cry from the abundant, if imperfect, dance of supply and demand in freer markets. Beyond the inefficiency, there is a loss of vibrancy. When people are not free to profit from a new idea or are shielded from the cost of a bad one, innovation slows. A society directed by central commands often grows rigid and stale, while one guided by millions of independent choices renews itself constantly. There is a deeper philosophical point here about the limits of human design. Many of the valuable patterns in society were not consciously designed at all. They emerged over generations of trial and error. Language is one example. No committee invented English or Chinese. People created them collectively by speaking and adapting words over centuries. The same is true of common law, which developed as judges built on precedents rather than writing a whole legal code from scratch. Morals and social customs often evolve because some ways of living simply work better than others in the long run. This doesn't make them infallible, but it does mean they carry a kind of buried wisdom, the knowledge of countless experiences knit into their fabric. When we sweep aside all tradition in favor of some new grand plan, we risk losing that accumulated wisdom. Revolutions that aim to remake society overnight, declaring that old religion, family structures, or cultural norms were obsolete, often ended in disappointment or worse. It turns out that society is not a machine that yields easily to retooling. It's more like an organism, grown in ways too intricate for any one mind to fully grasp. This calls for humility. It doesn't mean we must accept every old habit blindly, but rather that we should tread carefully, change what we must through open discussion and gradual reform, and respect the complexity of the social order. In a free society, people can experiment with new ideas and lifestyles, and indeed progress comes from such experiments. But that progress is usually evolutionary, building on what came before, not purely invented in a vacuum. Liberty provides the space for this organic growth, where each of us can try our innovations in how we live, and if they're good, others may adopt them, and if not, they fade away without dragging the whole society into chaos. This balanced outlook sets the philosophy of liberty apart from both radical revolutionaries and reactionary conservatives. The liberal-minded person has no desire to bulldoze society and rebuild it from zero overnight, unlike the utopian who trusts only in top-down design. But neither does a lover of liberty wish to ossify society in the past, unlike the traditionalist who fears all change. Instead, liberty encourages progress by consent. It trusts that through free debate and experiment, people will recognize improvements and adopt them willingly. Change comes, but organically and with respect for individual choice, not at bayonet point. In that sense, the true liberal is both an innovator and a guardian. An innovator because they welcome the new, a guardian because they protect the freedom that allows the new to emerge safely. All these ideas about markets and rule of law can sound theoretical, but the difference they make to real lives is profound. I was reminded of this when I befriended a man who had grown up in a country where nearly every aspect of life was controlled by the state. He had seen the dark side of a world without economic or political freedom. When he finally emigrated to a freer country in his middle age, the simplest things amazed him. I vividly recall our trip to a grocery store shortly after he arrived. We walked through aisle after aisle filled with goods, 20 kinds of bread, endless varieties of fruits and cereals, shelves of soap and toothpaste in different scents and brands. He stopped in the middle of the aisle, simply stunned. In his hometown, even basic necessities had often been scarce. People stood in long lines to buy whatever single type of bread or soap was available that day. The abundance and choice before him here left him almost giddy. He chuckled at himself for not knowing what to pick. Too many options, he said. But there was joy in that confusion, the sweet problem of freedom. Later, over coffee, he told me what struck him even more than the full shelves. "Back home," he said softly, "I was always afraid. Even if the store had food, I felt tense lining up because soldiers could cut the line or demand your papers at any time. At home, we spoke in whispers because walls had ears. Every day you watched what you said, what you did, because one mistake could bring the secret police. Here," he looked around the cafe, "here people sit and chat loudly about politics, laugh, criticize the leaders, and nothing happens. The silence of fear is gone." I realized then that beyond the material comfort, it was the invisible blessings of liberty that moved him most. The ability to speak one's mind, to walk the streets without trembling inside, to plan one's life not in secret, but out in the open. Seeing my world through his eyes was humbling. What I had always considered normal, going where I pleased, saying what I thought, owning the fruits of my work, he regarded as nearly miraculous. It made me appreciate anew how easily we can take liberty's gifts for granted when we have never lived without them. Liberty also grapples with the question of equality. Critics of free societies often point out that freedom can lead to unequal outcomes. Some people grow wealthy or powerful, while others struggle. It's true that liberty allows people's talents, efforts, and even luck to play out differently. It does not guarantee equal results for everyone. But it's worth asking, what is the alternative? The opposite approach is to have an authority try to level everything, to decree that no one can rise too high or fall too low. History shows that enforcing equal outcomes usually means enforcing mediocrity at best or widespread poverty at worst. In the pursuit of absolute equality, authorities end up having to coerce and control nearly every aspect of life, deciding who can do what, who gets what, and so on. That cure can be worse than the disease. It kills the spark of individual striving that drives progress. As one wit quipped, "Under such systems, everyone is equal, but equally miserable." A free society tends to reward value creation. Those who innovate, work hard, or offer something others want can gain more. While this does lead to disparities, it also means overall wealth grows and opportunities multiply. The living standard of the poor in an open market country often becomes far higher than that of the average person in a regimented economy. The focus of liberty is to make everyone better off in absolute terms, even if relatively some have more than others. Crucially, liberty demands equality before the law. That is non-negotiable. The rules must apply the same to rich and poor, to the well-connected and the average citizen. No special privileges, no caste systems. To the extent that inequality arises in a true free market, it should come from voluntary exchange and merit, not from someone rigging the game. In a healthy free society, there is mobility. Today's disadvantaged can become tomorrow's success story through enterprise and effort. None of this is to say that we should simply ignore the plight of those who struggle. Compassion and liberty are not enemies. In fact, free societies have shown themselves capable of great voluntary charity and community support, and many have chosen to implement a safety net, a basic floor of support for the unlucky or vulnerable. The difference is that in a free society, such help is ideally given in ways that don't destroy the incentive to improve one's own condition or undermine the sense of autonomy. The goal is to lift people up without trapping them in dependency. This, too, is a delicate balance. How to help the needy while preserving the dignity and motivation that come from individual freedom. Debates over the size and scope of welfare or progressive taxation are essentially debates over where to draw this line. But even when people disagree on specifics, the guiding principle of a liberal order is that any intervention should be carefully weighed against its impact on personal freedom and responsibility. Political and personal freedoms are equally part of liberty's promise. Consider freedom of speech, one of the cornerstones of a free society. This is the right to voice one's thoughts, whether wise or foolish, popular or unpopular, without fear of punishment by the government. That freedom is not just a nice to have, it's how a society corrects its mistakes and discovers new truths. If no one could question authority or prevailing beliefs, progress would grind to a halt. We might still be living under absolute monarchs or believing that the earth is the center of the universe. Every new idea or reform began as a dissenting voice. The abolition of slavery, the expansion of equal rights to women and minorities, scientific breakthroughs, these all required people to speak thoughts that others initially didn't want to hear. In a society that truly values liberty, the answer to speech we dislike is more speech, not enforced silence. By openly debating, we have a chance to persuade or be persuaded, to refine our views, and to inch closer to understanding. Censorship, by contrast, is an admission of fear that one's position is too weak to withstand discussion. Of course, free speech has its challenges. People will say foolish or even offensive things, but the alternative, entrusting some authority to decide which ideas are allowed, is far more dangerous. That power has been abused time and again by those who wield it. Along with speech, liberty entails freedom of religion, or to have no religion at all, as a fundamental right. It's the principle that your conscience is your own, and no state or mob should force you into or out of any faith. History is full of wars and persecutions over belief. Societies that embraced religious freedom turned down the heat on those conflicts and allowed pluralism to flourish. Similarly, the freedom to associate, to meet, organize, and form groups is a bedrock of civil society. Whether it's a labor union, a book club, a neighborhood watch, or a political party, the ability to join with others for a common purpose is both an expression of liberty and a safeguard against tyranny. Authoritarian regimes always try to atomize society, keeping individuals isolated. Free societies thrive on the connections people forge freely. I recall a time in my own town when a sudden flood hit the area. Instead of waiting for official rescue teams to dictate every move, neighbors took it upon themselves to act. At dawn, people from all walks of life showed up by the riverbank, filling sandbags and building makeshift levees to hold back the water. Local shopkeepers opened their stores to donate food and dry clothes. A church offered its hall as temporary shelter for families who had to evacuate. It was messy and improvised. Nobody was in charge, yet everyone somehow found a role. By the time formal aid arrived, much of the immediate danger had been managed by volunteers. What struck me was that this outpouring of help wasn't forced or coordinated by any authority. It arose naturally out of empathy and community spirit. In a freer society, people didn't sit idle waiting for orders. They saw what needed to be done and did it. That day I saw firsthand how liberty, far from encouraging selfish isolation, often brings people together. Freed to choose, many choose to help. Their voluntary cooperation achieved what no edict could mandate: genuine human solidarity in a crisis. Freedom doesn't stop at the border either. The liberty to trade and travel internationally has arguably been one of the greatest forces for peace and understanding among nations. When goods, ideas, and people cross borders freely, nations become interdependent in positive ways. Merchants from former rival countries become business partners. Students study abroad and make foreign friends. Consumers develop tastes for each other's cuisine and culture. All these connections create incentives to maintain harmony. It's much harder for politicians to drum up hatred for those people over there when those people are also your customers, suppliers, pen pals, or even in-laws. History shows that countries entwined by trade are generally less likely to go to war with each other compared to closed, autarkic states. After the Second World War, for example, Europe pursued economic integration, tearing down trade barriers and allowing free movement of people, and the continent has enjoyed its longest period of peace in modern history. By contrast, when nations isolate themselves, forbidding free exchange, misunderstandings fester and leaders find it easier to scapegoat outsiders. Thus, extending the circle of liberty beyond one's own nation through commerce, travel, and dialogue helps secure a more peaceful world. It's worth distinguishing liberty from democracy. The two often go hand in hand, many of the freest countries are democracies, but they are not identical. Democracy is a system of government where the majority or their elected representatives decide policies. This can be a great way to ensure government reflects the people's will. But majority rule by itself is not a guarantee of freedom. A majority can be ill-informed or swayed by passion. It can even become oppressive toward minorities or individual rights. True liberty requires that there are checks on what any majority or government can do. That's where constitutions, bills of rights, and independent courts come in. They set the boundaries of political action, ensuring that certain fundamental rights, like those to free speech, a fair trial, or private property, cannot be voted away, no matter how large the majority in favor. The framers of many liberal democracies understood that democracy unguided by liberal principles could degrade into what one philosopher called tyranny of the majority. In a moment of fear or anger, a majority might, for example, decide to imprison an unpopular group or seize the wealth of a minority. In a free society, such impulses are restrained by law and by the culture of rights. Thus, the ideal is a liberal democracy, a system where leaders are accountable to the people through elections, but the scope of their power is limited by higher principles that safeguard individual liberty. It's a delicate balance. Too many constraints and you frustrate the public's will, too few and you imperil personal freedoms. Getting that balance right is an ongoing challenge in every society. Our journey through the ideas of liberty, from the markets to the town halls, from the pages of history to the aisles of a supermarket, leads to a simple truth. Freedom is a living thing. It is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing project. Each generation faces its own temptations to trade liberty for the appearance of security, its own crises that test how much we truly value our freedom. In our time, the challenges continue to evolve. We grapple with questions the founders of earlier ages could hardly imagine. How do we protect privacy and independence in a world of digital surveillance and big data? How do we ensure open discourse when information flows instantly across the globe, sometimes accompanied by misinformation? The tools of control have become more sophisticated, but so have the tools of empowerment. The principles remain what they ever were. As much as technology changes, the human yearning to be free does not, and so the old vigilance is still required, perhaps in new guises. Despite the difficulties, I remain hopeful. The flame of liberty has been snuffed out in some places and times, but it has this way of reigniting when least expected. A forbidden pamphlet circulates hand to hand and plants the seed of reform. A crowd gathers in a square to demand their rights. A new generation, raised in peace and comfort, rediscovers the writings of old philosophers and finds in them fresh meaning. The desire to be free, to be treated with dignity, to have a say in one's own life. These cannot be permanently extinguished because they spring eternal from the human spirit. In the end, liberty survives through us, through our words, our choices, our insistence that each person matters. We keep the promise of freedom alive by exercising it and by defending it, in ways great and small. It might be in the ballot we cast, or in the respectful debate we hold with a neighbor. It might be in refusing to stay silent about an injustice, or in simply teaching our children to think for themselves and never let their curiosity be caged. Through such acts, we nurture liberty's flame. Think back to that small flame in the darkness. It needs tending. Shield it from the harsh winds of fear and tyranny. Feed it with the oxygen of truth and courage. In its glow, people can find their way, and communities can warm themselves with trust and creativity. There is no final victory for liberty, no moment when we can declare the struggle over, but neither is there final defeat as long as we remember, value, and fight for what is ours by right of being human. The Constitution of liberty, so to speak, is written not only in laws, but in our hearts and habits. As our long conversation draws to a close, I imagine that little flame burning steadily, passed from one generation to the next like an Olympic torch in a great relay through time. May we all strive to be worthy guardians of that fragile flame, so that its light never dies out, and so that the warmth of freedom is never lost to the cold night of oppression.